Welcome inside another edition, the final edition of Raiders Training Camp Podcast presented by SiriusXM. Vince Sapienza, company from Raiders HQ, joined by the one, the only, the voice of the Silver and Black, Jason Horowitz. Jace, what's going on?
Not too much, man. How are you? Happy start of the regular season almost.
Yeah, we are right there. We are on that precipice of the 2025 campaign. But before we get to the regular season, we have to close out the training camp that was. And I don't know about you, but there's something so unique about training camp. It is a grind. It is day in and day out. And it almost feels like Groundhog's Day at times. But there's something so unique about it that I'm going to miss it. I'm not going to lie to you.
Well, there is something special about it, and every training camp has its own storyline. And we've all watched Hard Knocks for a long time, and whatever team is featured, and every team, all 32 teams are doing their own version of that internally, whether it's on HBO or not. And we do a great job with that here, Silver and Black Productions. So there are people that everyone kind of sticks onto over the course of a 5-6 week period, and you want them to make the team. They're standing out, you get to know their stories, things like that. But the reality is we're so stuck in our own, I watched that guy, I watched every snap of that guy, I watched that. The storylines for the season are still kind of the same that they were 7-8 weeks ago, right? It is still Ashton Jeanty. It is still Geno Smith. It is still Pete Carroll. Yeah, we've thrown in Amari Cooper and new backup quarterback here in the last couple of days. So some of that's changed. But the storylines going into the season, partly because we've stayed so healthy, are the same that we thought going into training camp.
Yeah, we're going to get to some of the fresh faces that are coming to Vegas, but I want to start with kind of what you alluded to. The storylines are kind of the same. There's one storyline in particular that everybody was keeping their eyes on, and that was the progression of the offensive line. Obviously, they were dead last in just about all the rushing statistics from a year ago in that vein. But all of a sudden, training camp comes along, and now we see a position battle at the center spot, and then we see a position battle at the right guard spot. Now, Pete Carroll has since said that Jordan Meredith will be the starting center, and Jackson Powers Johnson for now will be leading the team at right guard week 1 into Foxborough. But what have you made of what that position battle in particular looked like, and what that means for still a very young player in a JPJ that people had high hopes on to be their center, yet is now in a different position to start the year?
Well, two parts. Number one, I don't know what it would have turned out to be had Alex Kappa been healthy. Rib injury pretty much all of training camp. We saw him in preseason game 3, a couple practices last week. I don't know if that would have had an effect or not. So that's A. And then B, I think we're getting caught up on the position. And maybe this is just more a me thing, because Jackson Powers Johnson kind of came out and said, I'm going to be the center. I've worked really hard to be the center. I was the center. We all know all of those things that happen in college. But in terms of if this line gels the way that it is, who cares if he's at right guard? If you second round draft pick who is a quality starter on your offensive line for years to come, does it matter if he's at center or at right guard? And that's how I'm looking at it. We saw JPJ start at left guard last year. He also played some center. Dylan Parham, they're flip-flopping here. But I don't particularly care whether he's snapping or if he's playing right guard. If he is mauling people, if they're opening up holes, if he and Jordan Meredith are working in tandem, then it's a successful decision, and we'll see how that plays out. If this team goes from dead last, 78 yards a game on the ground, to 12th, 15th, right, and 110 yards a game, whatever it is, and they're scoring in the red zone, which has been a problem all 3 of my years that I've been the voice of the team, then it's all a good thing.
Jason, to that vein, let's stay with the running game. It feels like the biggest highlight of the preseason wasn't necessarily a touchdown. It wasn't a defensive play. It was Ashton Jeanty back from the blue tent against the San Francisco 49ers, back out onto the field and running over a starting caliber NFL defensive back for a 13-yard gain and a first down. Felt like that was the highlight of the preseason. We got, I believe the number was 12 carries for number 2, the Silver Surfer. More than enough of what you needed to see out of the regular season?
Oh, I would have been okay to not see him touch the football. I know we all want to see him touch the football, but watching him go into the tent was an uncomfortable thing, I think, for everybody inside Allegiant Stadium week 2 against the 49ers. So that wasn't great. He had told us, we met with him before game 3 in Arizona. He joined us in a meeting on Friday, and he said he'd never had a stinger before. That was the first time he'd ever experienced that. Hopefully it doesn't happen again for a long time. But it was good to see him bounce off of that and get some carries. He's very bouncy. He's low to the. We all know that. Like, you could see it. No, but I mean that in a good thing. Like, Kirk Morrison and I have watched a lot of clips together over the last 3 weeks, and he's showing me different Ashton Jeanty runs and offensive lines and what they're trying to do and things like that. And I'm excited about that for the course of the season. But like, you can see Ashton jumping from one part of the hole to the other, and it's just natural. What Chip Kelly's trying to do. Remember back in May and June, the big story was like he only stood up, and now they want him bent over and all those things in his stance and all those things. But the reality is, once he gets moving, if he can get to the outside in space, he's going to beat a lot of NFL defenders. Now, does that mean he's taking a 3-yard run and making it 13? Does it mean he's taking a 7-yard run and making it 23? That's still to be determined. But as he described it to us, people don't think he's that fast. Yet watch him every run he's ever had, and he's running past people. He's fast. He's got all of that speed. When they say breakaway speed, he's got it. So if he can get to the second level, he's going to have a lot of yards this year.
It just goes to show, Jace, where we were as media and coverage during OTAs when our biggest story was Ashton Jeanty's not going to stand straight up in the backfield. Tells you how much we were fixing
and I gotta be
for
honest
football.
I don't know. Until that came up, and I don't know. Maybe I just don't pay attention to that type of thing. But I watched a lot of Boise State because my travels from the East Coast to the West Coast. So when I'd get into the hotel, they were always on 7:30 local time, whatever. And I watched a lot of Boise State last year, as a lot of UNLV and local people did. I can't tell you I ever paid attention to what his stance looked like. I can tell you how many runs he got for 50, but I couldn't tell you a single time that I looked at his stance.
Jason Horowitz joining us here on the Raiders Training Camp podcast presented by SiriusXM. Okay, let's get to a couple of the fresh faces. So the big story, obviously, out of the preseason is not necessarily that the Raiders went winless. It's that they left the preseason without a backup quarterback to Geno Smith. Aiden O'Connell plays 2 drives, fractures his wrist out 6 to 8 weeks, according to head coach Pete Carroll. So Pete Carroll says we need an experienced guy back there. When he was asked, well, what about a Cam Miller? What do you need to see out of Cam Miller to take that number 2 spot? He goes, a couple years experience. So it was very clear what Pete Carroll was looking for. They go out and they trade a 2026 5th-round draft pick to the Cleveland Browns for Kenny Pickett, a Super Bowl champion, a guy who's been traded a few times in his career, early on in his career. But this is a guy that Pete Carroll, John Spytek feel very comfortable with backing up Geno Smith. What was your immediate reaction to that deal and what that means for the team?
Well, so let's start with the draft pick part of it, Vince. I think a lot of people take so much ownership in draft picks about like, oh, this is too much or this is not enough. And my perspective on draft picks has always been the same. You have no idea who your 5th-round pick is going to be next year. You have no idea if you're going to trade that 5th-round pick. You have no idea if you're going to move back, move forward. And you also have no idea exactly how many picks you're going to have because of compensatory picks. The Raiders are probably going to have 10 or 11 anyway. So if that's what it takes to get a guy that you want to be your backup quarterback who is one play away from being your starting quarterback, then great. That's A. B, I think we also have to remember Kenny Pickett was a 1st-round quarterback, and he has a winning record in this league. And Pat Kerwin, who was my mentor, who's really good friends with Pete Carroll from their days at the Jets, and they've stayed that way, and Pat with SiriusXM on Moving the Chains on NFL Radio. Pat Kerwin once told me, you want your backup quarterback to be able to go 2-2 if he has to play for a month. And I think we saw that with Aiden O'Connell the first year. He was able to do that. There was more struggles, obviously, last year with all 3 quarterbacks. But I think with Kenny Pickett, you've seen enough that he's got talent. That's why you were a 1st-round pick. He's had experience. He's had starts in 3 straight years, 25 of them, and he's had success. He's won 60% of his games. So I know we go back to Pittsburgh and we look at his rookie year and they wanted more out of his offense and all those things. And to your point, he's been traded a couple of times. But you feel more confident today with Kenny Pickett as your backup quarterback than you did Saturday night with the injury to Aiden O'Connell. And so if you're looking to improve your team before week 1, I'd say that John Spytek did that.
Just the second player in NFL history to be traded 3 times in his first 4 seasons. You could look at that as saying, hey, what's going on with Kenny Pickett? Or you could look at the other side of the coin and say, this guy's in demand. Teams want this player. And so I think Raider Nation will look at it as the latter. You can also, when you go to the numbers to back it up, he has an average completion percentage of 62%, which is, if you're looking for a backup quarterback, again, help you out in spot duty, help you out in a jam. There's worse players out there, or there's worse options, I should say, out there. So it feels like the Raiders took care of what they need to take care of at the quarterback spot. Obviously, they're hoping that Geno Smith stays healthy. He has not been touched in the preseason. Yes, I know small sample size, but the offensive line has done very well in terms of protecting QB1 number 7.
Which was a problem last year, right? I mean, Geno was hit a lot in Seattle. Our offensive line, their offensive line, very different, obviously, but both teams are this preseason we're trying to fix those. So, yeah, I mean, we saw Geno for 4 plays week 1, couple of drives week 2, and then a 9-play touchdown drive week 3. So, yeah, small sample size. Well, a regular season, we'll call that a quarter and a half. But, yeah, successful quarter and a half. If you get sacked 1 time a week, you got sacked 17 times in the season, and you're probably breaking an NFL record. Maybe not quite, but you get the point. So it's a good indicator.
All right, let's stay on the offensive side of the ball. I'm not trying to be offensive biased, but a lot happening for the Raiders this week. An old face returns to the organization. Amari Cooper, the former 4th overall pick in the 2015 draft, finds his way back to the silver and black. He's now entering year 11, yet he just turned 31 years old. Feels like this guy's been in the league forever. Over 10,000 yards in his career receiving, 700-plus catches, 64 touchdowns. He obviously has some pedigree. 5-time Pro Bowler. What does he bring to this wide receiver room in particular for the Raiders?
Well, he brings experience, right? So there's that part. He brings a Pro Bowl caliber guy. He brings, in terms of the accolades of the last 10 years, he's tied for second in terms of 1,000-yard seasons over that time in the NFL. Mike Evans has 10 in the 10 seasons, but Amari Cooper's got 7. And I think Vince, if we were talking about Amari Cooper 2024, the ability to bring him in would just get everyone so excited because he was coming off with, keep in mind, Cleveland 2 years ago had 4 or 5 different quarterbacks and made the playoffs in part because Amari Cooper was so good. And so last year wasn't the same, gets traded to Buffalo, doesn't have the same year, kind of banged up a little bit. Okay, so we're 1 year removed. The question is Amari Cooper capable of what he had a year and a half ago? Or is Amari Cooper at the point where he can't do that anymore now that he's going to be, he's 31 going into year number 11? I don't know the answer to that. So I guess we'll wait and see. But he brings the pedigree, at least at the beginning, of knowing not only do you have offensive weapon 1 in Brock Bowers, offensive weapon number 2 in Ashton Jeanty, and offensive weapon 3 in Jacoby Myers, you have a guy who has, for much of his career, been offensive weapon number 1 or 2. And so if he is still capable of being that, this entire offense just got so much more dynamic. And remember, who's the guy slinging it? We just talked about it. Mm-hmm. One of the most accurate passers in the NFL the last 3 years is Geno Smith.
Yeah, Jason, obviously Raider Nation sitting there and scratching their heads just a little bit due to the timing of when it was first announced that Amari Cooper was returning to the Raiders. Obviously, contract negotiations and issues arising with Jacoby Myers. I'm not going to pretend to know what is or what is not going on there. There seems to be an impasse regardless. I can tell you that the Raiders and the organization value a Jacoby Myers very much, but it is my belief that the two deals are independent of one another. It feels like an Amari Cooper almost cuts into...
Oh, I agree with that.
Yeah.
Oh, no. I agree with Vince. Let's not forget that veterans sometimes don't want to be part of training camp. I'm pretty sure Matthew Stafford didn't even go to preseason game 3 from LA to Cleveland. So let's not, not having talked to Amari, right. I don't know that for a fact, but sometimes that plays a role.
Yeah, so we're on the same page there, but when it comes to, it is a very young wide receiver room. You just drafted 3 wide receivers, and Pete Carroll has said, we want to push this thing as far as we can. We want to win a whole bunch of games, and that's not a slight on the young wide receivers, but it's more so to the confidence that Pete Carroll has in what this team can do with a little added extra firepower.
Well, I would push back a little bit on the youth of it. I mean, I think we all saw Dante Thornton and what he can do, and he had that great back shoulder catch in Arizona for a touchdown, and he and Geno Smith have been working you watch the deep balls every day in training camp, and they are just trying to get on the same page, and he just brings a skill set that if it is as good as we've seen the last 4 or 5 months since they drafted him, he is going to be a dynamic weapon for the Silver and Black for a very long time. But having said that, Amari Cooper, not young. Jacoby Myers, not young. Trey Tucker, still young, but third year. Like, if those are your top 3, not really young anymore. You have a little bit, so there's a mixture, a nice mixture, if in fact Jacoby Myers is part of this wide receiver room.
All right, so all the defensive nuts and maniacs are sitting there. Are you guys going to talk about the defense? Let's talk a little bit about the defense. Maybe one of the biggest surprises of training camp is a guy that I did not have making this 53, but seems like a guy that Pete Carroll is banging the table for, and that is the homegrown talent in Caillou Blue Kelly. And it takes me to the bigger story, which is the secondary in general that we've seen of this training camp and the Raiders trying to find not just the starting two guys, but the entire depth for the cornerbacks and the safeties as well. Caillou Blue Kelly, one of the great stories out of training camp. What has been your biggest takeaway when looking at the silver and black secondary?
Well, a couple of things. I think we're going to have some growing pains, right? You want to talk about youth, right? The youth on the corners is certainly a storyline going into New England. So that's part of it. But sometimes you also just have to trust someone who's been there, done that. And, when you look at Pete Carroll, I know everyone's talking about the 14 years in Seattle, and like he did it this way. These are the guys they brought in. We're all just assuming these type of guys can be the same. And I don't know that they can. But when you look at what they did with Richard Sherman, right? Mm-hmm. 4th, 5th round draft pick. I don't remember exactly what it was, but Pro Bowler to the point where he's on Amazon Prime's coverage of Thursday Night Football. He's that good, right? And just more, even more recently, right? Richard Sherman was early in his Seattle tenure, but Reek Woolen was a 4th or a 5th round draft pick. And I know he's bigger than Darian Porter. He's bigger than Caillou Blue Kelly, but he wasn't someone that people were like, this is our 1st round, 2nd round corner. And he was a Pro Bowl in his rookie season. Now he's 6'3", 6'4". These guys aren't that big. But my point is, Pete Carroll knows what he wants in corners. He knows what he's looking for. There's going to be some growing pains, but there may also be much more success than I think we like. So we got to see. I think Jeremy Chin and his versatility is going to carry a lot of weight. They like Isaiah Polamau a ton. There's a reason they let their other safeties go in free agency, and they gave him, the undrafted free agent from 3 years ago, a new deal. They saw enough as a starter last year. Like this is, and we just we saw an interception in preseason game 1. Mm-hmm. So like there's a lot there in the safety side of things that if they're patrolling back there, it allows the corners to do some stuff, and you're gonna have to trust them. They're gonna grow. Eric Stokes, right? Again, 1st round draft pick. He is the 1st rounder of this group. I know he hasn't played the same because of injuries, but he has been healthy. Really, from minicamp, we've seen him instilled as corner 1. And so they clearly believe he's the guy, and he played like that as a rookie. So if he gets back to that, stays healthy, it may be more successful than we know going in.
Maybe I'm just eternally positive kind of guy. But, all the talk about, and I hear you on everything, it's going to be some growing pains in the secondary. But for a secondary that has, apparently to the outside world, just massive question marks, right? The small sample size that we have seen from that starting defense, They have 2 interceptions in the preseason. Isaiah Polamau, Jeremy Chin, both coming up with interceptions. So a little bend, don't break, and they've shown the ability to go get the ball. Again, very vanilla, both on the defense and offensive side of what they've done. But again, small sample size, there's a lot to be optimistic about. Yeah. We'll see what it looks like during the regular season. But from the youth of the secondary, let's talk about the vast experience at the linebacker. And in that linebacking room in particular, maybe the biggest story isn't just the fact that they have a revamped linebacker room. It's the fact that Jamal Adams all of a sudden has found not just a home, but may have found maybe his best position at the linebacker spot.
It's interesting. Sometimes veterans turn out to be really, really good. And they just need to be revitalized. They just need to get healthy. And they need to be put in spots to succeed. Pete Carroll has really from day one, Patrick Graham too, talked about their job is to specifically put players in positions to do what they can do well, not schemes where players have to figure it out. Now, Jamal Adams has been a Pro Bowl All-Pro guy. But to say the least, the injuries have gotten the better part of his career. So all of those things, if he is in position as a linebacker to be, again, I don't know that you have to hope that he's an all-pro player.
Right.
But is he making 2 plays a game that are game-changing type plays, then you got everything you could have asked for out of someone that a month and a half ago you wouldn't have thought was on this team. And not only is he on this team, he looks like he's going to be an important part of this team.
I don't want to go turn the clock too far back, but if we do go back a year ago, when we looked at this Raiders team, this Raiders roster, we sat there and we said, The defensive line is going to be the backbone of not just the defense, but the entire team. It is going to be the engine. It is going to be the game-changing game breakers that can help win you football games, the defensive line in particular. What a difference a year makes. That being said, the Condor is still nesting in his home on the edge there. Malcolm Kuntz is now back, seemingly healthy. We saw in the preseason finale in Arizona, we saw him for the first time really have that pop, really have that get off. And for me, and I know a lot of Raider Nation, Tyree Wilson seems like, again, he's got to do it in the regular season, but he seems like he has found that moment and he has found that gear that he needs to.
Yeah, no, I think so. And Malcolm Kuntz is the greatest, most recent example for the Raiders, right? The first couple of years were pretty quiet. Now, he wasn't the 7th overall pick. He was a 3rd-round pick. But year 3 was like, wow, look what we got here. And then, unfortunately, we never got to see year 4. This is kind of like his redshirt year 4.
Mm-hmm.
This is year 3 for Tyree Wilson. This is the year that's going to make or break whether or not the Raiders are picking up 5th-year option. This is the year that's like, hey, if he's starting to get it, maybe it is a stat. Rob Leonard got another year to work with him. Patrick Graham another year to work with him. And maybe it's the veterans behind him. Whatever it might turn out to be. But you're right about preseason and training camp. It really does look like, Vince, that over the course of the last 2 weeks, Tyree Wilson's a guy that's going to be an impact player on this team, and maybe someone we're talking about around the league. I still believe, and again, there's a lot of examples of first-round picks, top 15 picks that don't make it. We all know that, and the Raiders have had plenty of those. But ultimately, when you are drafted with the traits that he has, with the success he had before his injury at Texas Tech in November of his last year, you have the physical tools. Do you have the mental and then the next level ability? And we're going to find that out. I think we're going to find it out really early because week 1, New England's got a really young new offensive line. They have on the left side and the middle 2 rookies, and Garrett Bradbury is an experienced guy in the middle. But there's a chance there that the Raiders' defensive front has a chance to really take over that game. Now, the right side of the Patriots' offensive line looks like it's the same offensive line they've had for a while, but the left side's brand new. And I know Will Campbell was a top 5 pick. This is going to be his first game. And their left guard's a 3rd-round pick. So, this is an opportunity for the Raiders to really take hold of, and they this is the tone for the season. Let's set the tone.
I know and I understand Raider Nation attaches Tyree Wilson to that 7th overall pick. I get that, but that was a couple regimes ago. At this point, you were just trying to get the best you can out of Tyree Wilson wherever he was picked, because at the end of the day, when that 53-man roster's out, and
because it doesn't matter.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. When you're playing New England, nobody's sitting there saying I was the 7th overall. It's who can play the best. And right now, Tyree Wilson is playing the best football of his NFL career, and that is good news for the Silver and Black. Jace, before we let you go, in totality, 4 weeks of training camp, 3 preseason games, it's never perfect. There's always ups and downs. A relatively healthy training camp for the Raiders as they get set to get ready for week 1. What was your impressions on training camp in its totality, and how do you think that sets them up for week 1 in Foxborough?
More energetic, very hopeful. I think a different tone because of who's at quarterback, right? An experienced guy who has the stability, knowing the coach wants him here and all those things, all of that. And I just think the competition that was talked about turned out to be real. You talked about it earlier. Some of the guys that you thought that were going to have as starters week 1, you wouldn't have been talking about as part of the roster going in. Caillou, Blue Kelly, and Jordan Meredith, we might have been talking as the roster, but maybe not a starting center. Mm-hmm. So all those things about, hey, we're competing for roster spots. We're not. They turned out to be true. And so if that is, in fact, carrying over, it's going to wear off. It has to. Pete Carroll had all the success, and it wasn't always with the fanciest roster. It wasn't always with the best roster. But they had a lot of winning seasons. They had a lot of playoff years. Yes, they had Russell Wilson, and then they had Geno Smith. But we have Geno Smith. We also have Ashton Jeanty, and I think everyone believes, and rightfully so, if he stays healthy, he's got a chance to be very special. And then you throw in the fact that you've got Geno, and we haven't even really talked about Brock Bowers, who, by the way, on the broadcast said he's okay with Brock to miss prime. Then you have the making. If the offense can get to 23, 24 a game, remember, that's been really hard for this team the last 2 years. That close game loss becomes 8, 9, whatever wins, and then can you get to 10? Who knows? We'll see. But the optimism is real, the energy is real, and I think the plan in place is real.
If we got nothing else out of this training camp wrap-up, it's the fact that Brock Bowers is good with Brocktimus.
He's good with it. Yeah.
Jason,
and he did say when we get to October, if he has a good month, we can call it Brocktober. He did say that's okay too.
Love it. Jason Horowitz, the voice of the Raiders. Jason, we appreciate you. We'll see you week 1 in Foxborough. Thanks so much.
All right, guys. Thank you. Thanks, Vince.
This has been the Raiders Training Camp Podcast presented by SiriusXM. If you want to look back on any of the Training Camp Podcast episodes, all 8 of them can be located on YouTube, Raiders.com, or wherever you get your podcast. I'm Vince Sapienza, coming to you from Raiders HQ. Thanks so much.